Hey guys, tonight we're starting somewhere quiet. So quiet, in fact, that if a fly sneezed, you'd hear it echo. You wake up in a room where time feels suspended. Outside the window, night has wrapped the world in a soft blanket of darkness. A gentle rain taps against the glass, like a polite guest who knows you're not expecting company. Inside, the air is still, holding that faint scent of old wood and something almost like dust from a forgotten library. You probably won't survive this level of stillness if you're used to scrolling your phone every 6 seconds. But let's see what happens. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you do, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious to see where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, the rain's rhythm becomes your metronome as you notice the oddest thing. Without the day's chatter, the thoughts you usually ignore are suddenly louder, not in a bad way, more like a radio station you didn't know you had, playing old memories, little regrets, and those questions you've been dodging for months. Historians still argue whether moments like this are a gift or a trap. The ancient Stoics would have called it an opportunity. On one wall, you spot an antique clock, frozen at exactly 11:03. The hands don't move, and yet you feel time flowing. In the room's bones, the Romans had a word, tempus suspensis, for time held aloft. It's fringe history, but some medieval monks claimed such moments happened in deep contemplation, when the mind stepped outside the hours. That might sound mystical, but sitting here, you understand what they meant. You stretch your toes against the cool wooden floorboards. The sound is oddly loud. One of those little details you only notice when the world goes still. The last time you heard floorboards creak this clearly, you were probably sneaking into the kitchen at midnight. Difference is, tonight you're not after snacks. You're after something else. In the far corner, a single candle burns, wax pooling at its base. The flame's dance is hypnotic. You remember reading that in 17th century Japan, samurai in training would sometimes meditate by candlelight to sharpen focus. Whether that's completely accurate or a romanticized story is up for debate. But right now you see the appeal. The flame refuses to rush, refuses to be anything other than what it is. You lean back against the wall, feeling the grain of the wood press into your shoulder. The rain softens outside, now more of a whisper. Somewhere in your head, the noise of deadlines and what ifs thins out, replaced by a simple awareness. You're here. That's it. Here. Not in yesterday's mess, not in tomorrow's stress. And in that awareness, a tiny thought takes root. Maybe the real trick isn't finding a perfect moment, but noticing the imperfect one you're already in. The Stoics had a thing about this. You can't control the weather, the noise outside, or even whether the clock decides to tick again. But you can decide how to sit in this room, how to breathe, how to pay attention. The candle wavers as if agreeing. You exhale, long and slow, and something in your shoulders unclenches. It's not enlightenment, not yet. But it's the first step, and sometimes, first steps are just as important as the destination. You stand, stretching your legs, and the room lets you go without protest. The rain is still whispering outside, but now your attention is drawn to a narrow doorway you hadn't noticed before. Beyond it, the air feels cooler, touched by the scent of wet earth. You step through, and your bare feet meet the uneven texture of small stones. It's a path, a narrow one, winding forward into a dim, silvery light. The stones vary wildly, some smooth as polished river pebbles, others sharp-edged, pressing into your skin with little reminders that comfort and awareness rarely walk hand in hand. You think about something you once read. In ancient Rome, soldiers trained to march barefoot on rough terrain to toughen the mind through the feet. Historians still argue whether this was effective or just cruel, but right now, you understand the logic. Each stone forces you to choose how to step. And that's when the realization hits. These aren't random stones. Each one, in your mind's eye, carries a memory, yesterday's decisions, small and large, solidified under your feet. The smooth one, the day you chose patience instead of snapping back. The jagged one, the time you acted out of impulse, regretting it instantly. They're all here, paving this path, and you can't swap them out. You smirk to yourself, thinking how a stoic like Epictetus would handle this. He'd probably shrug and say, "You can't change the stones, but you can change your step." It sounds simple, but it's a skill, deciding whether to press forward lightly, roll your foot to avoid the edge, or step boldly right onto the sharpest point. Up ahead, the path narrows further. You notice patches of moss between the stones, softening the pressure. Not a mercy, more like a reminder that not every choice is painful, even if the ones before it were. The scent of rain-soaked moss pulls you into a memory of walking through an old botanical garden, one that claimed its layout was inspired by medieval monastery paths. There was a plaque explaining how monks arranged stones intentionally uneven to slow the soul down to the pace of prayer. Whether that was true, or just tourist brochure poetry, you find yourself slowing now. One particularly sharp stone catches you off guard, and you wince. A modern reflex kicks in, the urge to curse under your breath, but you catch yourself. Instead, you pause, put weight on the other foot, and study the culprit. You think about how often in life you've stumbled into pain, only to rush past it without learning anything. What if, instead, you examined the hurt, learned its shape, remembered its location? Wouldn't that make you wiser on the next step? Somewhere behind you, the sound of the rain shifts, like it's falling on leaves instead of glass. The path curves, and the light ahead glows warmer. You're not sure if it's sunrise or just another candle waiting in the distance, but you keep moving. A thought surfaces. In ancient Greek training grounds, young athletes would run on pebble-strewn tracks to build not just speed, but awareness. One misplaced step could twist an ankle, ending their season. Life's not so different. One careless choice can twist a whole year. You flex your toes against the stones, feeling their unchanging solidity. The decisions of yesterday are fixed, yes, but the way you carry them today is still yours to decide. That's a strange kind of freedom, not erasing the past, but walking it differently. The warm light ahead grows brighter. You can't see its source yet, but you know the path will lead you there, stone by stone. The path of stones draws to an end, tapering into a strip of worn wooden planks. They lead to something narrow and suspended, a bridge stretching out into a fork so thick you can't see the far side. The air is cooler here, damp against your skin, and the boards beneath your feet give a faint creak with each step forward. You pause at the edge. The bridge looks almost delicate, a lacework of timber and rope, the kind of thing that makes you wonder who built it and why it hasn't collapsed yet. Historians still argue whether ancient rope bridges in the Andes were more engineering marvel or death wish, but those Inca suspension bridges, woven from grass and fiber, lasted centuries. This one feels like it could last another minute. Or maybe not. You take a step. The sound echoes strangely, a hollow thunk that fades into the mist. Then another step. The board flexes, and your grip tightens on the rope railing. Your own heartbeat feels louder than the bridge's creak. Somewhere in the fog, something drips, slow, steady, like a water clock marking time you didn't agree to. And there it is, the familiar weight in your chest, doubt. You know it well. It's been with you in job interviews, first dates, even at the grocery store when you stared along at a wall of cereal boxes. Doubt is not new, but here it's almost tangible. A voice, not quite yours, whispers, "Are you sure this is the way?" It's the same voice that, thousands of years ago, probably made a young sailor in the Mediterranean question if he'd tied the knots right before heading into open sea. Sometimes doubt is a saboteur. Other times it's a guardrail. The trick is knowing which. Halfway across, the mist thickens. You can't see the planks ahead. You stop, feeling the rope sway under your hands. You think about the medieval pilgrim, trails you once read about. How travelers crossed bridges shrouded in mountain fog, unable to see more than a step ahead. Some claimed the uncertainty made them pray harder. Others, that it sharpened their trust in their own feet. Which camp you fall into is still up for debate. You test the next plank with your toes before shifting your weight. It holds. That's small. Success is a kind of answer, not the loud, cinematic you're on the right path, but the quiet reassurance that the next step didn't kill you. Sometimes, that's enough. There's a subtle rhythm to it now. Lean forward, test the plank. Step. Each creak is a question. Each solid landing, a reply. You realize the bridge isn't the enemy. Neither is the fog. They're just the setting. Doubt is the real companion here, walking right beside you, checking every move. Maybe not a friend, but not a pure enemy either. More like a gruff mentor who won't let you get lazy. A sudden gust pushes the fog aside for a heartbeat. Far ahead, you glimpse a dark shape, the end of the bridge, solid ground. And then the mist swallows it again. You laugh quietly, because isn't that exactly how life works? One glimpse of certainty, then back to the unknown. You keep moving, slower now, not because of fear, but because you want to feel each step. The planks, the sway, the rope under your palms. Somewhere in this narrow stretch, above the unseen ground, you find something unexpected. Focus. Another step, another creak, and your foot meets stone again. The bridge is behind you. You turn to look, but the mist has already hidden it, as if daring you to question whether it was ever there. Gravel gives way to packed soil, and then to a hush that feels almost botanical. You slip between two stone posts into a garden, so still it sounds like it's listening to itself. Moonlight gathers in shallow pools across the path, and the hedges are trimmed into strange shapes, not animals, not symbols, more like punctuation. A karma of boxwood, a question mark of you. You smile despite yourself. Of course the shrubs here speak in grammar. The air carries the mild, peppery scent of crushed thyme underfoot. Ahead, beds of dark earth are planted not with flowers, but with small slate plaques, each etched with a question. You crouch to read a few. What do you actually control? When did you last change your mind? Which story about yourself is past its expiration date? The questions don't accuse, they simply open. Like doors you didn't notice on a wall you've walked past for years. By the path, a stone bench waits, worn at the edges like it has hosted countless conversations. You sit, and the bench cools the back of your legs. Somewhere a night insect clicks a patient metronome. A figure steps from the hedge's shadow and sits at the other end of the bench. If you'd arranged it yesterday. Bare feet, cloak, face that is both ordinary and unmistakable. The broad nose, the calm eyes that seem to ask before you speak. You don't need an introduction. I don't answer, he says softly. I ask. The voice is gentle, dry at the edges, a little. Like tea left on the counter too long. You resist the urge to blurt out something clever. Instead, you exhale. All right, you say. Ask. He gestures toward the plaques. Pick one. You reach for when did you last change your mind? And hold it between your palms. The slate is cool, heavier than it looks. The man watches your fingers, not your face, as if the truth is hiding in your hands. You try a small joke. Does changing my dinner order count? He lifts an eyebrow that says, only if you also changed your life. Fair. You think back. The last real pivot. The time you decided not to reply in anger. The time you took the long way home and found, inexplicably, that the long way was shorter. The plaque warms. Or maybe that's your pulse in your palms. A breeze runs its fingers through the time, and your visitor taps the bench with two knuckles. Why did you change? He asks. You give an answer that sounds reasonable. He tilts his head. And, why did that matter? You give a better answer. And why? He says again. Did you believe that was true? You laugh under your breath. It's the most annoying, helpful ladder you've ever climbed. Somewhere inside you, an old assumption cracks, like thin ice, and water moves again. Off to the right, a little signpost leans, carved with a line from Delphi, know thyself. A mainstream fact flickers up from memory. That motto greeted visitors at Apollo's sanctuary, where people asked the Pythia everything from politics to personal drama, and somehow the reply was always a riddle wearing a toga. Another, a tidbit reaches for your shoulder. That Socrates claimed a daemonion, a kind of inner voice, sometimes stopped him from the wrong action. Fringe to some, practical to you. You felt that quiet no thank you in your chest before you did something dumb. Historians still argue whether Plato's portrait of this man is history or philosophy wrapped in sandals. But here, the method, not the face, is what matters. The garden path splits into low aisles, each lined by questions blossoming on slates, like nocturnal flowers. What would convince you you're mistaken? Which fear is a mask for care? What would a kinder version of the truth sound like? He rises, and you follow, slow, the way people move in museums, when they realize they've been looking at paintings with their eyebrows instead of their breath dot at a small fountain. Water slips from a cracked amphora into a shallow bowl. The sound is steady, the kind that makes time forget itself. Your certainty, he says, where does it live? You start to answer, in facts, in evidence, and he nods, pleased, then points to your chest. And here, you grimace. Here it's more of a roommate situation. He laughs, a low rustle, and for a second you like him too much to remember. He's about to tie your thoughts into beautiful knots. You try to keep the jokes light. If I agree with you quickly, do I win philosophy? He shakes his head. If you agree too quickly, you lose the question. You pocket that line to use later on someone who tries to sell you a miracle supplement. The questions grow bolder as you walk. What are you pretending not to know? What would you think if you were someone else watching you live? Who profits? When you stay confused, you feel the garden arranging you from the inside out, not by giving answers, but by adjusting the angle of every mirror you carry. You think of the Agora, that bustling Athenian market where, factually, debates and gossip swirled like dust in sunlight. Somewhere in that city, about 399 BCE, the man beside you drank hemlock, then renounced his practice. This is not a murder garden. It's a stubborn garden. It refuses to trade the question for comfort. He stops by a plaque that's different from the rest. Lighter stone, softer chiseling. The question almost whispered, who are you, when no one is keeping score? The world runs on scoreboards. Followers, steps, revenue, streaks, you've built your share. But this question empties the bleachers and turns off the jumbotron. You stand there in the more soft dark with rain somewhere very far away and notice the outline of yourself without the numbers. It's not dramatic. It is, somehow, more reliable. Good, he says. Not as a grade, but as a gardener noticing. A seedling has found the sun. He points to the soil. You kneel and find a wooden crate half buried, packed with labels. Each bears a familiar title. I must be right. I must be light. I must not fail. You pull one free and turn it over. On the back, in small script, or else what? You snort softly, apologetically. Or else the sky falls. He gestures up. The sky, for now, keeps its job. You sit beside the crate, setting labels in a small stack. He crouches with you, knees popping, which is oddly comforting. Apparently even ideas have joints. When you plant a belief, he says, watch the fruit it grows. He hands you a fresh tag. I can be wrong and still be whole. The handwriting looks suspiciously like your own. Something loosens behind your sternum. The garden has done nothing. Fancy. No thunder. No revelations with fireworks. It has simply asked your mind to hear itself think, without the usual audience. You feel taller and quieter at the same time. As you stand to leave, he nods toward a final plaque near the exit. What question will you carry to the next place? You pick it up, trace the letters once, and slip it into your pocket. The stone is unexpectedly warm, as if someone held it just before you. Maybe they did. Maybe every visitor takes this same question and writes their own answer over a lifetime. You thank him. He shrugs in that way that means you did the work. You start toward the gap in the hedge, then glance back to memorize the path, the fountain, the time, the bench, but the garden is already rearranging itself, hedges smoothing, punctuation turning back into green. Typical. The moment you think you know a place like this, it politely becomes somewhere else. You step through the posts. The time crushes once more under your heel, releasing a last whisper of pepper and sun. Ahead, the path narrows, and faintly, beyond a scrim of fog, you hear wooden rope and the soft, careful footfalls of someone crossing from doubt into the next question. You realize it's you, still moving, still asking, not looking for the last answer, just the next honest one. You follow the filament of golden light and emerge into night air that smells faintly of rain-washed stone and warm bread. The passage opens onto a small square, not grand, more like a courtyard that forgot to be important. Lanterns hang from iron hooks, their halos puddling on cobbles worn smooth by uncounted feet. Somewhere nearby, a baker shutters his window. Somewhere farther, a cat announces a treaty violation with a trash bin. At the center of the square waits a bench, not imposing, not even large, just luminous. It looks like wood leafed in old gold, the kind that has learned humility. Hairline cracks run along the seat and arms, spidering into patient constellations. You touch it and the surface is warm, as if the metal remembers sunlight. You sit. The bench answers with a soft, well-bred creak that says, yes. Many have sat here to think. You're in decent company. Across from you, a colonnade casts rhythmic shadows, column gap, like a measured breath. You can almost hear sandals on stone, gait unhurried, attention exact. The figure who steps into the lantern glow wears a robe and a look that's 50% curiosity, 50% let's define our terms. He nods toward the bench. You notice the cracks, he says, voice low, Greek vowels rounded like river stones. Good. The surface shines, but the truth shows in the faults. You already know his name. History put it on a million syllabi. Aristotle, you say, and he smiles with the faint weariness of someone who's been correctly identified for 2,300 years. He gestures at the square. Everything here teaches balance if you let it, he points. The lanterns spaced evenly. The colonnades repeating intervals. The bakery's window, half open for air, half closed for warmth. Too much light blinds, too little confuses, too much openness chills, too much closure stifles. He taps the bench arm, where a crack widens, then narrows. The mean is not the middle of mediocrity. It's the right measure for the moment. You think of the hourglass in the chamber, sand flowing up against expectation, and your feet remembering the stone path spite. Balance isn't a number, it's a pasture. The bench seems to approve. Or maybe that's just your spine unhunching. A straightforward fact strolls in, calmly. Aristotle founded the Lyceum in Athens around the 4th century BCE, where students walked and discussed ideas, hence peripatetic, walking around. You picture them circling a courtyard like thoughtful planets, orbiting questions. Joke one, gentle. You've met modern peripatetics too. They're called people on Bluetooth pacing the kitchen. Historians still argue whether the Nicomachean ethics was polished into its present form by Aristotle's own hand or compiled from lecture notes by his students. Either way, the heartbeat is clear here in the square. Virtuous practice, measured again and again until it fits. He sits beside you, leaving a respectful span of golden space. Courage, he says, is not the cliff's edge, It is the ground. You learn to trust near the edge. He lifts upon recklessness, excess, cowardice, deficiency, courage, the mean. He turns his hands slightly, as if balancing an invisible scale. The lantern light collects in the creases of his skin like small coins. You test it aloud. So generosity isn't giving until you can't pay rent, and it isn't hoarding just in case. It's the way of giving that stays sustainable. He nods, pleased. The teacher's yes that means keep going. A breeze knits through the square. From somewhere behind the columns comes the faint clack of wooden training swords. The gymnasium nearby hasn't quite called it a night, a mainstream. Detail surfaces. In classical Athens, physical training and philosophy kept close company. The Lyceum literally blended track, trees, and talk. Bodies and minds learning to pace themselves together. Joke 2. Your smartwatch would be very proud of this cross-training. Aristotle glances at the bench's cracks again. This seat was made to rigid at first, he says, as if he watched it happen. Without give, things break. With too much give, they fold. He presses lightly, and you feel the arm yield a breath, then hold. The mean is not arithmetic. It's fit for purpose. You try a modern example, because that's how your brain folds wisdom. Caffeine. Too little and you're a yawning cave. Too much and your heart files a noise complaint. The mean is that quiet cup at the right hour. He half smiles, not at the coffee, but at your willingness to translate. Tell me, he says, where do you habitually go to excess? You make a face. Deadlines. I sprint the last mile like it's a hero test. He hums. And deficiency. You pause, asking for a help. I wait until it's a rooftop flare situation. He nods. Then your mean is not a middle you've already mastered. It is a craft you must learn. He reaches into his sleeve, of course he does, and draws out a thin reed and a small strip of parchment. He writes 4 words: angled and patient, courage, temperance, justice, practical wisdom. He taps the last. This one keeps the others in tune. Quirk drifts across the square like a cat pretending it isn't headed your way. Some medieval copyists allegedly doodled marginalia. Rabbits jousting. Snails battling knights. Besides serious philosophy, the human hand can't resist play. Even on the solemn page, Aristotle raises an eyebrow at your grin. Moderation includes joy, he says. A festival without measure becomes chaos. A life without festival becomes grey. Joke 3. You mentally delete your calendar entry, titled Have Fun Efficiently, 20 minutes. He stands and gestures for you to walk. You pace the square's edge together. People mishear me, he says. They think the golden mean is always centered, but context moves the fulcrum. In famine, generosity means sharing dangerously. More, in plague, courage sometimes means staying home. He tilts his head toward the lanterns. The right light for this night. You think of Alexander the Great, Aristotle's one-time student, and how excess and deficiency played tug-of-war across continents. It's a historical fact that Aristotle tutored him in youth. It's an open question. How much of the teacher's moderation survived in the general's appetite for conquest? Historians still argue whether Aristotle's influence bent toward Alexander's policy of blending cultures, or whether the empire simply outran any philosophy that tried to keep pace. Either way, the square's lesson stands. Power without proportion becomes a fire that forgets it lives in a hearth. You circle back to the bench. The hour feels elastic, long and soft like the rain you left behind. Aristotle points to a hairline crack, widening over the seat, and rests 2 fingers on either side of it. Bridging the gap. Repair is also a mean, he says. Between denial and despair sits the steady work of mending. Kintsugi comes to mind. The Japanese art of fixing ceramics with gold lacquer, making the break part of the beauty. He nods. Unsurprised you went there. We are neighbors in wisdom more often than we admit. You ask the question that has been sitting with you since the garden. How do I know where my balance is? And not just the balance people expect. He looks toward the columns, where moonlight stripes the stone like a combar code. Start with function, he says. What is this for? This action, this habit, this day. Then find the measure that serves the function without injuring other virtues. And test it in reality, not in thought alone. A tiny bell rings, not from a clock tower, but from a street seller's tray being packed away. The square exhales. You realize you've been rehearsing this scene 4 years without knowing it. Sitting on your own invisible golden bench, trying to place your weight so the creak is honest and the seat holds. Aristotle tears the parchment in 4 slender slips and hands them to you, one by one. Keep these as rulers you can bend, he says. They measure differently on different days, the strips warm in your palm. Like the slate you pocketed in the question garden, he steps back into the colonnade's rhythm, and you can't tell, the shadows take him or he chooses them. Before he fades, he calls softly, almost like a coach, from the track's edge, remember, the mean is not a compromise with fear. It is courage tuned to reality. You sit again, letting the bench distribute your weight until it purrs approval. Lantern light, cat treaty, bread warmth, the columns, pulse. The square becomes a metronome you can carry. The golden cracks don't promise perfection, they promise use. You rise, pockets heavier with 4 flexible rulers, and find the next street already waiting. Not straight, not crooked, but shaped to the night. Behind you, the bench shines. The way mended things shine, not to blind, but to guide. Ahead, the faint hush of water returns, a river voice that sounds suspiciously like letting go. You take a balanced breath and follow it. The river voice hushes you along a narrow lane until the sound slips indoors again. Stone swallowing water, night leaning in. The air cools, and your steps slow as the passage darkens. Not menacing, just deliberate, like a theatre dimming before the curtain lifts. You touch the pocket where the 4 flexible rulers ride. Feel their papery calm. The golden bench balance still sits in your spine. Somewhere behind your eyelids, the candle from the first room flickers. Patient as ever, the corridor bends and widens into a chamber with no windows and one presence, a tall, black-framed mirror standing a little off-center, as if it asked to be left alone and the room obliged. No lanterns here, only the mirror's surface, faintly luminous, like a pond memorizing the moon. You step closer, your outline arrives, and then refuses to fill in. No eyes, no cheekbones, no stray hair doing acrobatics. Instead, words ghost across the glass, pale as breath on winter air. Why are you doing this? You almost laugh, a customer service prompt from your own soul. The phrase fades, replaced by another. What happens if you stop? Then another. What would you keep if no one clapped? The questions arrive without punctuation, and yet you hear commas, the way you heard punctuation sculpted hedges in the garden. You lift a hand, your fingers don't reflect. They ripple, a mainstream fact pads in, comfortable. Long before silver-backed glass, people met themselves in polished copper and bronze. Ancient Egyptians and later Greeks buffed metal until it kept a face like a secret. The Venetian glassmakers on Murano would perfect the modern mirror by the 16th century with tin mercury amalgam, turning reflections into something crisp enough to correct your posture. Tiny joke one, you straighten your shoulders anyway. If a Renaissance artisan can risk mercury fumes, you can risk good alignment. On the mirror, a new line unfurls. Tell the truth you tell, if no one could punish or reward you. You think of the hourglass with its sand climbing upward, how direction changed when watched. All right, you say, quietly, to the room and to yourself. Let's try this without applause. You test a minor truth first, something about your calendar becoming a Tetris board with feelings, and the mirror listens politely, the way a good friend does when you warm up before saying the real thing. Then you set a heavier truth on the surface, that you chase achievement because it's easier than risking affection, that you perform competence to avoid asking for a help until the rooftop flare. The glass doesn't flinch, the words lift and rearrange like starlings, and for a moment you see a map, Small roads branching from one old decision you never noticed you made. You step back, heart thudding with a rhythm not unlike the bridges. Creak. The mirror offers a softer question. Who taught you that being loved required being useful? Not an accusation, a hand outstretched, you swallow. Somewhere water keeps its hushed. You remember reading about mirrors draped after a death. In Jewish homes during Shiva. In some Victorian parlours, too. An old instinct to keep grief from bouncing back, trapping the spirit. A quirky sidestep follows. John D., the Elizabethan magus with too much curiosity, and arguably too much time, scried in a glossy black obsidian mirror. Some say it was an Aztec artifact carried to Europe after conquest. Historians still argue whether his famous dark mirror really rode that path across oceans or acquired its legend later. But the human urge is clear. To look into a surface and hope it looks farther than you can. You exhale and meet the glass again. It answers with one spare word, arriving like a rung on an invisible ladder. Why? Because I'm afraid, you say, surprised at how ordinary the answer sounds in the dark. The word doesn't accuse you either. It simply joins you, like the garden stone bench did, making room. The mirror writes back, afraid of what specifically? You smirk. The Socratic echo is strong with this one. Afraid of wasting time, afraid of failing publicly, afraid of succeeding and still feeling empty. The last phrase lands with a heavier ripple. The glass brightens a hair, the way a sky brightens before it decides whether to rain. From somewhere, in memory, a candle flame steadies. From somewhere in your pocket, the parchment slips whisper practical wisdom. You try an experiment. What if I chose the mean between hiding and grandstanding? The mirror obliges. You would do the work, whether or not anyone notices, and you would ask for help before the flare. Your chest answers with a small, relieved ache. The mirror shifts tactics. Lines appear like the ruled pages of a school notebook, fitting, given the 4 rulers tucked against your palm. At the top, write 3 whys. You hesitate. Then let them come, plain spoken, to be of use without disappearing. To love with fewer conditions. To learn until I'm unafraid of being wrong. The words linger, then soak into the glass as if the mirror drinks them. You half expect a grade. Instead, the smooth surface returns one sentence. Keep these if they make you kinder. Change them if they don't. Light humor slips in to keep the air breathable. Is there a platinum membership where I get fewer follow-up questions? The mirror, which has already mastered dry wit, returns. Ask better questions. Joke 2. Roasted by glass. Add that to your autobiography. You notice now that the frame is veined with the same gold you saw in the bench's cracks. Kintsugi logic migrating from wood to woodwork. Mending, not hiding. You trace a fingertip along the gold and feel warmth, as if every repaired place remembers a hand. I break things when I go to extremes, you admit, even the good things. The mirror writes. Then practice the right. Measure daily, not dramatically. You think of Aristotle resting to fingers across a crack. You think of calendars that schedule fun efficiently. And you let yourself grin. Another mainstream marker steps in, bringing its own lantern. In the 20th century, Viktor Frankl wrote that humans can endure almost anyhow with a strong enough why. His book has lived on knit stands for decades, dog-eared by people who needed steady words more than shiny ones. You're not in a camp with barbed wire, you're in a quiet room with a persuasive rectangle. And yet the point holds. Reasons tether you when weather blows weird. The mirror offers a final prompt you don't see so much as feel. How will you carry these wires when the room is noisy again? You picture the candle's patient light, the bridge's step test, the garden's peppery time and useful silence, the bench's proportion, the ruler's bend, the river's hush. You realize you're collecting instruments, not trophies. The hourglass's upward sand returns to your mind. Attention can flip the flow. You can look for permission, or you can look for purpose. The latter turns gravity around. Okay, you say, and this time the word doesn't skid, it lands. If I forget, I'll look for the nearest crack to mend, not the nearest stage to climb. I'll measure with the flexible rulers, not with the crowd's volume. I'll check my why before I check my notifications. The mirror, apparently fluent in modern incantations, glows the way a phone screen glows when you don't need it anymore. Joke 3. Somewhere, your screen time report sheds a single tear. You stand there a long minute, not waiting for applause, just waiting to see if the glass will argue. It doesn't. It writes one last sentence in tiny script near the bottom edge, so small you have to kneel to read it. When you are tired, borrow the river's pace. You listen, and there it is again. That slow hush, no medals, no deadlines. Water doing what water does, moving by not insisting. You reach to touch your reflection. The mirror does something kinder. It offers you your outline again, faint, but present, not features, but posture. Shoulders less guarded, chin no longer braced against invisible weather. That's enough for tonight. You bow to the person in the glass, the way you'd bow to a teacher who asks good questions, and then dismiss class early as you turn. The chamber obliges the living by gifting a doorway of dim light. You slip the 3 whys into the mental pocket with the 4 rulers. The frame's gold lines catch your eye, a last reminder that repair is not a downgrade. On the threshold, you look back. The surface is blank now. Keeping your confidence is the way old stone keeps echoes. The corridor breathes you out toward sound again, not noise, sound, and you feel the current of air from a larger space ahead. Somewhere, very close, water waits without a dam, patient as a teacher who never raises their voice. You follow it. The corridor exhales you into open night, and the sound you've been following unfurls at last, water speaking in one long, low sentence. The river is broad, but unhurried, skin of pewter broken by soft seams where the current changes its mind. On your side, reeds lean in, gossiping in small sibilants. Across the water, the far bank keeps its own counsel, a dark ribbon under a paler sky. You step onto damp sand and feel the cool give beneath your feet, a different kind of support from stone and bench, the kind that says, I will hold you for a moment and then return to being river's edge. You stand, listening, and the hush turns into instruction. The river keeps nothing. It uses everything. It doesn't clutch the leaf, it carries it. Doesn't hoard the moon. It borrows the light and sends it downstream intact. You test the idea by picking up a small stick, setting it gently on the surface, and watching it spin like a lazy compass. Your shoulders release another notch, a permission slip from moving water. A figure is seated not far from you, or a flat rock, posture easy, eyes not demanding yours. The robe is simple, the presence simpler. When he speaks, it's a voice you recognize even if you've only met it in books, quiet and thorough, like a hand smoothing wrinkled cloth. If you grip the water, he says, what do you hold? You crouch, scoop your hands into the river, and of course it slides away, leaving your palms cool and clean. Nothing, you admit, slightly amused by your own eagerness to pass this extremely obvious test. He nods, and yet you are called. Mainstream history pads up beside you, respectful and sure-footed. More than 2 millennia ago, in a deer park at Sarnith, a teacher offered his first sermon about suffering and its end, a will set in motion that would keep turning along roads you now walk in your own way. Historians still argue whether the Buddha's date sits squarely in the 5th century BCE or edge into the 4th. The calendar forks just the way river now throws mist at dawn. But the current of the teaching is steady. Clinging makes hurt, letting go makes room. You watch your stick slip downstream. Indignant for a half a second, you picked a good stick. And then weirdly relieved to see it go. I hold on to things, you say, as if confessing to the river itself. Projects, grudges, the idea of myself on a perfect day. He smiles with his eyes. The mind tries to make shells out of water. A tiny bell note rings from the bank behind you. You turn to find a half-buried jar with a small hole in its top, A drop of river water falls through a reed and plinks into the jar, resonating a clear, musical chime. You grin, a garden sukinkatsu, a water zither, the Japanese tucked under eaves to make music from drips. Quirky, yes, but tonight it's also a parable the size of your palm. Even falling becomes song when you don't fight gravity. Light Jokwon, gravity, undefeated since, always. Your gym membership can confirm. You sit on the sand. Let your toes draw loops that the tide promptly edits. The hourglass from the chamber reappears in your mind, sand climbing, because you paid attention differently. If attention can reverse an hourglass, you say, maybe attention can reverse a habit. The figure looks at the river. Attention is the fairy. He gestures to the current, where little eddies spin like thought bubbles in a comic strip. Watch a thought the way you watch a leaf. No need to shout at it or write it a dissertation. The suggestion is kinder than any productivity hack you've ever saved and forgotten. You try it. A thought about tomorrow's inbox slides by. You label it work, and it rotates out of sight without the usual passy of anxieties. Light. Joke 2. Somewhere, your calendar just felt ignored and filed a complaint with Thursday. Your mind, very proud of its ability to complicate things, wants to build a dam anyway. But if I let go of everything, you say, won't I become careless? Unattached to people, to promises. He shakes his head. Non-attachment is not non-care. The river carries everything it touches. It simply doesn't keep souvenirs. You think of the mirror's line. Keep these if they make you kinder. Change them if they don't. Letting go of outcomes might actually make you gentler with the actions. You can practice the craft without strangling the results. A heron slides low over the water, wings doing that magician's trick where movement looks like stillness. It lands near a riffle and becomes a statue that breathes. You remember reading about Emperor Ashoka carving pillars in stone across the subcontinent, edicts pressing compassion and restraint into rock, public reminders to carry dharma the way rivers carry silt, too far banks and next seasons. Fact, not rumor. The pillars still stand in places, their lions looking in 4 directions like a promise to keep the whole map in mind. Your river nods through time at those lions, and you nod back, pick up something heavy. The figure suggests. You glance around, find a rounded stone just smaller than your open hand, and lift it onto your palm. Name it, he says. Name the thing you're carrying that carries you, you whisper, needing to be right. The stone isn't any heavier for the words, but your arm feels the effort of pretending it's weightless. Hold it, he says gently, until your arm tells the truth, less than a minute, and there it is, a warm egg begging for honesty. Now set it in the water, you do. The river accepts the stone. If it had been waiting with infinite patience for you to notice where stones belong, your wrist tingles with fresh blood. Your mind with a relief, so quiet you almost miss it. He nods toward your pocket, the flexible rulers. You pull the slips from Aristotle, lay them on your knee, let night make their letters soft. Courage, temperance, justice, practical wisdom. These measure how you let go, he says. Courage to release, temperance to avoid swinging to disdain, justice to keep your promises without keeping people hostage, wisdom to see which grip is care and which is fear. Across the water, a clump of moonlight detaches from the sky and floats. No, not moonlight. A paper lantern someone has launched, bobbing low. You think of the flower sermon story from Zen, a teacher lifting a blossom instead of speaking, and a single student smiling in sudden comprehension. Historians still argue whether that moment ever happened outside legend, whether it's a later parable reverse-engineered to sanctify silence. Either way, tonight your river makes the same point in fluent hush. You don't always need more words. Sometimes you need fewer hands. You watch your breath move in, out, like a river practicing being a lung. The mirror's questions sidle back. What would you keep if no one clapped? The answer arrives without trying. This watching. This carefulness that doesn't bruise what it holds. The upward sand hourglass feels less like a trick and more like a reminder. Attention is gravity's cousin. It pulls what you look at into the shape of your looking. The figure on the rock shifts, not fidgeting, just editing his own posture to match the night. Suffering visits, he says. Pain arrives like weather. Clinging turns weather into climate. You think of your rooftop flare habit. The way you grip self-sufficiency until your knuckles ache. You think of the Sukinkitsu's bell. Drip, chime, release, drip, chime, release. Your shoulders do that small, useful sigh. A mischievous thought swims up, requesting a joke permit. If I let go of my phone for a whole day, you say, will enlightenment offer me a loyalty card? He smiles, not indulgent. Exactly. More like he appreciates the attempt to keep things breathable. If it does, he says, lose the card. Like joke 3. Somewhere, a marketing department just felt a disturbance in the force. You stand, and the sand smooths your footprint the way a kind friend smooths a wrinkled shirt before a photo. The figure points to a bundle of reeds tied with simple twine. A raft, he says, useful to cross. You understand the old parable before he speaks it. Tools are for ferrying. Carrying them on your back after the crossing is only a new kind of drowning. The flexible rulers, the 3 whys. Even this river lesson, instruments, not idols. The current makes a sound like laughter, if laughter learned patience. You step to the edge and let the water touch your ankles, cold and intimate. You imagine every name you've given yourself written there in temporary ink. Some stay, the ones that make you kinder, and the others blur and drift like your stick did. You don't feel emptier. You feel more available to your own life. On the far bank, a path glimmers, not a promise, just a possibility shaped like a footpath. The figure's voice follows the current into your chest. When the mind clutches, he says, borrow the river's hands. You nod, knowing exactly where to find them when the room gets noisy again. You step back onto the sand, lighter in a way your spine understands before your mind does. The water keeps what it's always kept, nothing, and somehow everything. Behind you, the Sukinkatsu plinks one last clear note. Ahead, a slope rises toward a silhouette that could be a tower. You think of ideals, of stairs that teach thighs, and thoughts at the same time. You tuck the rulers and the whys away and follow the faint path. River scents humming under your ribs like a long, low chord. The slope gathers you from the river's edge and turns into stairs, shallow at first, then steeper, the kind that make cabs speak in polite complaints. The air thins just enough to sharpen your attention, and the night grows clearer as if elevation were a kind of soap for the sky. Ahead, a silhouette takes shape, a tower, narrow at the base and widening as it rises, the opposite of a fortress, and exactly like an idea. Stone blocks, ultimately pale and dark, give the walls a quiet rhythm, and narrow windows glow with a light you can't place, not candle, not moon, something closer to the color of understanding right before it becomes words. You touch the first stair with your toe, the way you tested planks on the fog bridge, and then you climb. The 4 flexible rulers in your pocket keep time against your hip. Courage, temperance, justice, practical wisdom. A 5th presence hums with them now. The river's habit of holding without clutching, as if the tower requested clean hands before entry. The doorway is open and undecorated, just a slab of stone cut, so well it feels like respect. Inside, the spiral begins. The steps are worn in the center, and that comforts you, the way seeing thumb marks on old banister wood does. You're not the first to climb here, which takes the pressure off being the best. The air smells faintly of olive wood, chalk dust, and something like rain caught in limestone. Your palm glides along the inner wall and finds shallow carvings, triangles, circles, a proof you can't remember, but trust anyway. A mainstream fact climbs with you, steady as a hand on the rail. Somewhere around 387 BCE, Plato founded the academy in a grove outside Athens, a place where geometry and philosophy were not separate chores, but neighboring doors. Historians still argue whether the famous warning, one ignorant of geometry enter actually hung at the gate or was a later flourish. But the sentiment winds up the stairwell, a subtle draft. Learn how patterns behave, and you'll stop tripping over them. Like joke one, you tell the stairs you once passed geometry. They decline to applaud and keep being stairs. On the first landing, 3 niches face you like quiet hosts. In the left, a pale disk that isn't a lamp waits with patient brightness. In the middle, a column carved into soft proportions seems to hold up nothing but grace. On the right, a shallow bowl holds water, so still you only know it's water because your breath moves over it. Above each niche, a single word: truth, beauty, goodness. You're not surprised. You're promised this tower. You step closer to the disk. It shines without consuming, the way candlelight in a far chapel finds you without grabbing. Truth, in this room, doesn't behave like a hammer. It behaves like a lamp someone remembered to clean. You think of the mirror's questions and how they rearranged themselves into a map when you told the heavier truths. Maybe truth isn't a weapon, but a direction. Something that knows where north is even when you don't. The middle niche holds beauty, wearing the disguise of proportion. The column's curve is exact without being rigid, like a dancer who learned every rule and then forgot them at the right time. You hear Aristotle's voice from the square, amused. Moderation includes joy. Beauty that refuses joy is just good. Pasture. Beauty that forgets measure is a parade with no route. The bowl in the right niche reflects your outline, the way the mirror finally did. Faint, honest. Goodness here isn't a scoreboard. It's a temperature. You hold your hand over the water and feel warmth where they should be cool. You think of your 3 whys: to be of use without disappearing, to love with fewer conditions, to learn until you're unafraid of being wrong. Goodness, then, is not a halo. It's a habit with body heat. The stair beckons again. You climb, spiraling past small alcoves where fragments of dialogues are carved into stone like trail markers. What is it? It's self by itself. What do we owe the city, and what do we owe the soul? Who should teach the young, and what counts as teaching? At one turn, the wall bulges out to form a little window. You look down through it and find the river, a dark silver line, moving without needing a speech about moving. The tower and the river seem to recognize each other, like old friends who decided to work in different departments. On the next landing, a low table holds a thin layer of dust and several tablets arranged like sleeping fish. When you brush one, letter surface, pulsing once before settling. The cave. The image arrives promptly. Figures in a cavern, backs to the world, watching shadows and naming them reality. A mainstream note sets its lantern down. Plato's allegory of the cave. In the Republic, walked students from shadows to sunlight and asked whether a person who saw the forms could go back and explain daylight to those who preferred shadow puppetry. Historians still argue whether Plato intended the forms as literal capital art realities in a separate realm or as scaffolding for thinking about permanence. Either way, the stairs keep insisting on up. Like joke 2. You make a mental note to thank whichever friend dragged you out of your metaphorical basement and into fresh air. Even if you grumbled about the brightness, you place your palm flat on the tablet and watch a faint glow trace the lines of your hand. The tablet returns a single question. If you saw more clearly, how would you be kinder? The forms aren't asking you to become an inspector with a clipboard. They're asking how your seeing changes your touching. You tuck the question into the pocket with the rulers, where it hums in key with practical wisdom. Higher now. The windows widen, and night leans in with a friendliness it reserves for rooftops and end-of-shift bus stops. In a recess, a bronze lamp shaped like an owl watches you pass. A wink at another fact. Orthena's bird, stamped on ancient coins, turned wisdom into small change people carried daily. Quirky side step glides in. There's a rumor that Plato described a man as a featherless biped, and Diogenes marched in with a plucked chicken announcing, "Behold, Plato's man." The Academy allegedly added with broad, flat nails to patch the definition. Historians still argue whether the chicken cameo, report, or roast, but it's an excellent reminder not to define people like you're building a cheap chair. Light joke 3. You pat your own unplucked self in solidarity and proceed. At the penultimate turn, a door stands ajar. The room beyond is spare, a mat, a low shelf of wax tablets, a stylus, a small jug of water, an olive branch set crosswise, like a makeshift compass. Someone is here, an older man with a forehead like weathered marble, and eyes that treat you as both student and colleague. He gestures to the mat. You sit. Silence does its good work for a while. Forms, he says finally, voice soft enough, not to bruise the word, not to make you leave the world, but to help you return to it with your hands better aimed. He turns the stylus between thumb and forefinger. You have felt truth's light, beauty's measure, goodness's warmth, a small smile. Now tie them to action, or they become museum pieces. You nod. The mirror, the river, the bench all nod through you. He draws a triangle. One point labeled no, one love, one do. When one corner swells, he murmurs. The figure warps. Keep the figure sound. He taps the stylus against your knuckles like a friendly metronome. You don't need certainty to move. You need orientation. He stands and opens the far shutter. The view pours in, rooftops, like folded paper, the river's bright seam, the garden's dark punctuation, the bridge's faint bone, the square's patient lanterns. Way off, a scatter of low workshops glints with workable light, metal, wood, stone, hands learning their instruments. The owl lamp blinks at them, as if to say, go there next, take what you need, he says, nodding at the shelf. You choose a wax tablet small enough for your pocket. When you slide it in alongside the rulers and the whys, the tablet warms, softening a little as if inviting revision. The old man seems pleased. Good. Forms are not trophies. They are patterns you practice. He walks with you to the stair and touches the wall where countless palms have smoothed the stone. Historians still argue whether I taught with unwritten doctrines, he says with a sidelong glance. But unwritten practice is the only doctrine that matters. He gestures downward. Return with your seeing, not away from the scene. You descend, and the spiral feels shorter on the way down, like a story that knows when to stop talking. The tower keeps its quiet, the niches breathe, the owl resumes its night shift. Outside, the air is gentler, and you realize the river has tuned its voice to match your pace. The path ahead leans toward those low buildings where tools and hands eventually agree to meet. You touch the pocket, rulers flexing, whys steady, tablet warm, truth, beauty, goodness aligned like a compass. You can actually read. The ground underfoot becomes wide and wooden, scattered with shavings that smell of cedar and lemon oil. Hammers speak softly in the dark, and someone hums a tune that knows about repetition and grace. You smile. You've found the place where ideals get their hands dirty without getting their hearts dim. You step inside. You duck beneath a timber lintel and step into warmth that smells like cedar shavings, linseed oil, and steel that recently remembered fire. Light falls in slanted bands from high windows, catching dust motes that drift away soft thoughts. Due just before sleep. Benches run the length of the room, their surfaces scarred with years of honest work. Tools line the walls, not museum pieces, but instruments with calluses. You feel your shoulders drop. This is not a place for posing. This is where ideals roll up their sleeves. A figure looks up from a whetstone wheel. Not a foreman, exactly. More like a patient weather system. They nod once, and with that nod the shop recognizes you. Pick your station, the figure says, voice low as a hand plane. You glance around and notice for workbenches front and center. Each has a name burned into the wood grain. Courage, temperance, justice, practical wisdom. Your pocket warms. As if your flexible rulers have found their cousins, you start at courage. The bench holds a small hammer, a leather apron, and a block of metal stamped fear. Beside it, a set of stamps labeled truth, care, next step. The instructions, if there are any, have been absorbed by the wood long ago. Your pulse kicks. Fear sits there like a dare, cool and heavy. You set it on the anvil, a squat thing with edges rounded by generations, and tap the next step stamp lightly. The sound is modest, but it lands inside you with a calm clank. Courage here isn't fireworks. It's the impact of action small enough to repeat tomorrow. Light joke 1. Take that. Motivational posters with lions. At Temperance, shaving curls nest in tidy spirals the color of honey. A hand plane waits. It's sole smooth. It's iron sharp. A wooden placard reads, remove only what keeps the peace from. Fitting. You test the plane and hear that satisfying whisper. The shop's favorite sentence. You think of the river. Carry. Don't clutch. You think of Aristotle at the golden bench. Too much give folds. Too little give breaks. Planing becomes a breathing exercise for your hands. You take a fine pass off your habit of just one more email and a thinner one off disdain disguised as discipline. The shaving lifts and falls like a white flag you're finally willing to wave. Justice's bench is arranged like a scale, turned into a tall chest. There's a square for true angles, a ruler scarred with measurements that clearly matter to someone who needed them to be right, and a mallet whose head is dense but balanced. A bowl of brass tacks sits nearby, each blank on one side and etched on the other with words like do, owed, fair share, repair. You turn one over and find a question. Who benefits if you stay confused? You think of the garden's plaques and smile without being able to help it. Justice here is not a gavel. It's the habit of checking your angles before you nail someone else's. You square a frame, been building in your head, one labeled my contribution at work, and realize the left side is longer than the right. You trim, test again, and feel something inside stop wobbling. At practical wisdom. The bench looks like an air traffic tower for all the others. Ledger paper with smudged notes. A small sand timer flowing in the correct direction this time. And a drawer full of templates, labeled try this first. A sign above, burned neatly into oak. Fit for purpose beats theory for theory's sake. You take out a template shaped like a day. It has 4 apertures. Do, learn, care, rest. You lay it over your schedule like a stencil and recognize at once where you've been tracing the same mistake. Overfilling do, starving rest, calling it noble. Then buying panic with the interest. The template doesn't scold. It just shows you where the wood will split if you keep forcing the joints. The figure by the whetstone glides over. Steel or edge, they ask. You blink. Edge, they nod and set a chisel in your hand. Then sharpen, they turn the wheel. Water from the trough kisses the stone and darkens it. You angle the chisel, find the bevel, and let the wheel bring the edge back to honest. Sparks show up only to say hello and wander off. Daily, they say edges don't stay sharp. Out of admiration, a mainstream fact settles onto the bench. A tame sparrow. In medieval Europe, apprenticeships in guilds often ran about 7 years. The young learned by sweeping, fetching, grinding, and then, little by little, by making. Historians still argue whether that 7-year term was universal or just typical in certain cities, but the point survives the paperwork. Craft is repetition you consent to. Light joke 2. Your inner teenager asks if there's a shortcut. The whetstone smiles and keeps turning. You wander to a shelf where pigments sit in small crocks, ultramarine, vermilion, ochre, and remember a quirky truth. In some Renaissance studios, apprentices ground lapis lazuli by hand to make ultramarine, so precious it was literally worth more than gold. A blue reserved for Mary's robe and rare skies. The figure catches your glance. Cost reminds care, they say. Use what is rare where it matters. You think of your attention as pigment. Maybe you stop painting the background with the most expensive blue. The shop breeds with you. Hammers speak in civil tones. A saw somewhere whispers its own line. You catch the smell of beeswax and remember the mirror's gold-veined frame. Repair turned visible on purpose. Mending is a mean, Aristotle said, to fingers bridging a crack. You choose a small wooden box from a bin labeled promises you can keep. The lid binds at the corner. Justice lends you the square, temperance lends the plane. Courage lends the hammer for the stubborn pin. Practical wisdom points to a file thin enough to kiss the hinge. You work them in sequence, measure, remove, set, smooth, and the lid closes with that quiet shaft that feels like applause. Like joke 3, the box just assumed you. The figure returns and lifts the box, tests the seam, nods. Don't let ideals do only theory, they say, setting it down, let them build. A hinge that doesn't bite. They gesture at the room, at you. Your life is joinery. Nails are loud. Fit is quiet. You think of long debated mysteries and the way craftsmen become legends. Uriah grabs one. Historians still argue whether Stradivari's secret lay in varnish chemistry, wood density, microscopic fungus, or just relentless practice guided by a refined ear. Whatever the myth, the lesson is dull in the best way. Excellence is many small rites repeated, until the shop itself learns to help you. At the back, a rack holds tools with names stamped in brass. You run your finger along them and grin at a few. The long silence before speaking, asking for a help before the flare, sanding down the story you tell about yourself, returning what doesn't belong to you. You choose to and slip them into your belt. They feel like they've always been yours, and you just forgot to pick them up. Break something, the figure says, not unkindly. You look surprised. They chuckle. Here, they hand you a small clay cup fired deliberately thin. You tap. It's a hairline crack skates out like a river on a map. Now mend. You mix a bit of resin and gold powder from a shallow dish and brush it into the line. The seam shines when it sets, not pretending it never happened, not asking forgiveness for existing, just telling the truth beautifully. The figure watches the light catch. Let your fixes show, they say. People learn where to hold you. You spend time measure cycling the benches, sharpening, planing, squaring, fitting. Each pass makes a sound your chest answers. The river's habit of carrying not keeping has crept into your hands. You put down tools without needing to own them, and they are somehow more yours for that. The flexible ruleless flex, approved by the benches they echo. Your 3 whys. Be of use without disappearing. Love with fewer conditions. Learn until you're unafraid of being wrong. Lie open on the ledger. Smudged a little. Stronger 4. The fingerprints. The figure brushes shavings from your sleeve. You don't finish virtues, they say. You leave them set up for tomorrow. They tilt their head at a side door you hadn't noticed. Boards weathered, handle cool. Take what you can carry without clutching. You tuck the chisel, sharp, a small square, and the planes come into your kit. You leave the whetstone where it belongs. Here, where tomorrow waits. When you open the door, the air that comes in smells like damp grass and low fog. It's cooler again, and the warmth of the shop stays in your clothes like a remembered hand. The figure gives a last nod, not farewell, more like you know the way back. You step out. The ground drops into a broad field veiled in mist. Dew. Beads on tall stems, each drop holding a small moon. Somewhere out in the whiteness, the faintest bell of water sounds, not a river now, but something provisional, like puddles and ditches teaching you about impermanence. You tighten your apron, slide the square into your pocket next to the rulers, and breathe the kind of breath people take before they walk into weather they can't schedule. The field waits with its many possible losses, and you feel strangely steady. You've sharpened for this. You put a boot into the wet grass, and the night accepts the print without protest. Ahead, the mist lifts in thin veils and lays them back. Down again, a hand rehearsing a goodbye, a hello, a goodbye. You step forward, ready to imagine the worst without becoming it. Tools tapping against your hip, companions who refuse to dramatize and never fail to help. Mist braids itself through the grass like slow smoke, and the field opens in a wide hush. all edges softened. Do strings silver along each blade. And when you step, the wet cuffs your ankles with that polite cold that wakes the skin without scalding it. Somewhere to your left, a ditch keeps a narrow ribbon of water, and every so often a drop falls from a bent stalk and makes a sound so tiny it could be the Sukin Kutsu bell's little cousin practicing scales. You breathe out and let the shop's warmth ride in your sleeves, the plane's calm still in your hands, the chisel edge sitting straight in your pocket, like a good thought you can use. The field is where losses come to rehearse, not to hurt you, but to show you their faces under gentle lighting. You stand, and the mist brings you a task you already suspected. Premeditatio malorum, the rehearsal of misfortunes. Mainstream fact standing quietly in the grass. Seneca actually recommended this, writing that one should picture poverty, exile, illness, and ask, is this what I feared? Not to marinate in dread, but to shrink the monster to its true size. Historians still argue whether such stoic exercises harden people or soften them. Did they make Romans better citizens, or just unusually composed at dinner parties? But out here, the practice feels less academic and more like learning the choreography. Before the music starts, you crouch and draw a rectangle in the dew with your square. A simple frame labeled, "What could go wrong?" The mist obliges, offering, slides like a very polite horror show. Project fails, friendship phrase, money thins, health hiccups. You nod at each one like an usher checking tickets. Welcome. You may seat yourselves by the aisle, light joke one. You briefly consider serving popcorn. Decide that's a little on the nose. Carry on, one by one. You set them on the grass and measure them with the flexible rulers. Courage first. What action could I take today that would help even if the result is delayed? A 5-minute email for clarity. A budget you actually open. A doctor's appointment you stop treating like an optional side quest. Tap, tap, small. Blows on the anvil of routine. Temperance next. What can I do less of that quietly feeds the problem? One fewer late night doom scroll. One fewer promise you make to impress a ghost audience. You feel the handplane of your attention take a thin, perfect shaving off the habit called catastrophize, but make it artisanal. Justice. Who else is affected? What do they actually need from me versus what I dramatize as my duty? Sometimes the fair share is an apology. Sometimes it's stepping back. Sometimes it's asking for help before the flare goes up like a rooftop. Distress firework. Practical wisdom. What's fit for purpose? Here. Now. The template with its 4 apertures. Do. Learn. Care. Rest. Overlays the day in your mind. You can feel the joints dry fitting. You choose not to force the wood. The mist thickens in a dip of the field, and a bigger slide rolls in, losing. Face. You place it down and look at it the way you'd look at a warp board. From the end, squinting. You set the chisel's bevel against the fear, and it admits a small truth. Most of that face is a mask you carved to begin with. The merest tiny script returns. When you are tired, borrow the river's pace. Okay. If the worst is looking foolish, then the plan is to look foolish on purpose a few times this week, until your nervous system stops treating it like a dragon. Say I don't know in a meeting. Ask a dumb question and watch the relief slide across 3 other faces. You mark the board usable. A fringe tidbit wanders in with the fork, odd and somehow helpful. In Victorian times, people sometimes wore mourning jewelry braided from a loved one's hair. Grief turned into something you could carry, not to freeze time, but to make loss portable and visible. You picture a thin bracelet of your own anxieties, not to glamorize them, but to keep them where you can see them, not where they can ambush you. The gold scene in the little mended cup back in the shop flashes in memory, catching light, telling the truth beautifully. Next slide. What if I lose money? You set down your square and mark 2 lines. What is at risk? What is non-negotiable? Food, shelter, medicine. The line that justice guards with both hands. Courage whispers, learn the numbers you've been avoiding. Temperance takes a pass off retail therapy, but make it self-care. And practical wisdom writes sinking fund on your palm, in invisible ink you can still feel. You remember a mainstream oddity about risk. The first modern insurance markets grew out of London coffee houses like Lloyd's, where captains and merchants poured danger over bitter cups. Somehow it helps to imagine fear wearing an apron and asking who needs a refill. The ditch gurgles in approval. The dew takes notes. The field is patient. You keep laying out losses until a whole row of them sits blinking like owls in daylight. What if the project dies? Then you salvage lumber, contacts, skills, lessons, and build a better frame next time. What if the friendship fades? Then you grieve what was true. Stop forcing what isn't. Plant something else in the space that opens. What if the health scare is real? Then appointments, second opinions, a slower schedule calibrated to healing, not heroics. Ask for soup instead of applause. You look at the list and feel something you didn't expect. Not doom, but competence. The wheel turns. Your edge holds. A path through the mist brightens, and you follow it to a small rise where an old scarecrow leans, hat tattered, coat frayed, arms out as if measuring the horizon. You tip your head to it in solidarity, both of you practicing, standing in weather. A bird lands on the scarecrow's sleeve, unimpressed. You grin. Light joke too. Rumor confirmed. Birds do not read joke descriptions. You remember another fact that feels like a friend arriving. Roman general Fabius Maximus earned the nickname Cunctator, the delayer, for refusing to rush into battle with Hannibal, choosing attrition over glory. Not glamorous, terribly effective. You borrow a little Fabius for your field kit. Delay panic, not action. Take the next small step that changes the map by a centimeter. Historians still argue whether Fabius saved Rome or merely bought time for others to do it. But time well bought is a kind of victory. Then later, the mist thins briefly and reveals a gate at the far side of the field. 2 posts, no fence, the idea of a boundary more than the fact of one. Between the posts lie 2 tracks in the grass, curving apart like choices. You know what's coming, and the soft sarcasm in your chest gets there first. Of course this field ends in a decision. Of course it does. Like joke 3, somewhere. A philosophy professor, just fist dash pump dot closing parenthesis before you reach the gate. You kneel and press your palm to the ground. You thank the field for letting you practice loss without paying full price. You tuck your list away, not hidden, just folded. Like a map you can consult without worshipping. The hourglass from the tower glows in memory, sand streaming upward. When watched, attention isn't a shield, but it is a tool. The bridge returns with its testing toe, the garden with its patiently rude plaques, the golden bench with its acceptable creak, the mirror with its tiny low word why, the river with its hands you can borrow, the shop with its hinge that doesn't bite. You are not empty-handed at the gate. A breeze wrinkles the mist. The ditch sings a small agreement. You step toward the posts. Feel the square tap your thigh, the chisel rest, the ruler's flex. You don't know which track you'll take, yet. You only know you'll measure as you go and mend what cracks tell you to mend. The field behind you holds your rehearsals, without keeping them, like the river does with leaves, like a good teacher does with questions, like night does with footsteps. Once you have slept, you look once more over your shoulder. The dew has already erased your earliest prints. That's not erasure, that's mercy. You turn back to the gate and breathe in for the count of 4, out for the count of 6, a small bargain with your own weather. Then you step between the posts into the choice that waits, not louder, just next. 2 posts become 2 doors as you draw close, not elaborate, just present. The way choices are when you stop pretending you don't see them. A lintel of weathered wood spans both, and faint letters have been carved there by many hands. Desire to the left, aversion to the right. The grass between them is brushed into 2 shallow tracks that curve out of sight like parentheses around your evening. Your palm finds the square in your pocket. The 4 flexible rulers settle, attentive. The field behind you holds its breath. Very politely you stand where the mist thins and read the room inside your ribs. Desire hums with neon promises. Delicious, efficient, glorious, pick 3, while aversion crosses its arms and insists none of this is safe. The merest tiny script returns, why? The river replies, hold, don't clutch. Aristotle taps the bench, right measure, not middle for its own sake. You roll your shoulders and step forward until you can press your ear to each door. Left first. Desire's door is warm. You hear the muffled bass of 1,000 small yeses lining up like dominoes. Wanting is not the villain. It's a compass that's been drinking espresso. You picture Plato's charioteer from the Phaedrus, reins in hand, one horse noble, one unruly, and the driver trying to braid their momentum into direction. Mainstream fact, walking in with an old textbook under its arm. Plato really did sketch that image to describe the soul's pull between reason and appetite. And every time you've wanted a second dessert and a meaningful life at the same moment, the allegory has nodded sympathetically. Right door. Aversion's what is cool. From behind it, the hush of closed curtains, the relief of leaving early, the siren call of not trying. Aversion promises safety the way a blanket promises weather control, comforting, limited. You listen longer. It has a point. Avoidance kept your ancestors from petting saber-toothed cats. It also keeps your emails unanswered. Pick, says a voice that might be your better patience. You set the square on the lintel to see if either door hangs true. Both are slightly out. You grin despite yourself. Of course they are. Desire without measure drags you. Aversion without sense stunts you. Courage pats your sleeve. Practical. Wisdom flips its sign to open. You try a method you trust now. A toe test like on the fog bridge. You push desire's door just enough to see a path lit in amber. On the first stones, learn the skill. Send the message, apply, reach out, risk the draft. Admit you care. It's not a red carpet. It's a workshop floor swept enough to work on. Farther along, the light brightens until it starts to glare. The signs change tone, overbook, overpromise, overheat. A banner flaps that reads you are what you achieve, and a small, exhausted version of you waves from underneath. You pull the door mostly closed, not in scorn but in respect. Desire's first mile is holy. Its fifth, unpaced, is a bonfire that forgets the house. Aversion gets the same courtesy. You nudge the right door. Inside, a path of soft grey stones invites rest. Caution, edit, wait, decline. Clean air, fewer alarms. Your nervous system sighs with gratitude. A little farther. The stones turn to mud. Delay becomes drift becomes. Disappear. A faded sign whispers, if you never try, you never fail, and your stomach does that honest twist truth produces when it's phrased as a bargain. You pull the door back until it latches with a click that sounds to final. Not no. You say just, not everything no. A figure leans where the posts meet, as if they grew themselves there out of timber. No robe this time. A work jacket, the color of evening, pockets full of pencils. The Romans had a gate too. They offer, eyes on the horizon. Janus, two-faced not for duplicity, but for perspective. Looking forward and back, they opened his doors in war and shut them in peace. Mainstream fact bows. Under Augustus those doors were famously closed. A public sign the empire wasn't marching anywhere for the moment. Historians still argue whether the doors were truly closed as rarely as the poets brag, or whether the record is more PR than ledger. But the image sticks. Doors tell on the weather inside a city. Yours do too. You laugh softly. So which door? The figure shrugs with a carpenter's wisdom. Neither, both, either, but in pieces. Use the benches you just left. They nod toward your pocket. You hold up the rulers for inspection. Courage glints, temperance breathes, justice evens the scale. Practical wisdom runs the numbers without making a scene. You know how to do this, the figure says. You bind yourself to masts when the sirens sing. You loosen the knots when the seas calm. Odysseus arrives uninvited, sea water in his hair, ears full of wax, or rather, his crew's ears are Quirky tidbit pebbles over. Sailors in later retellings really did bind their captains to masts in some performances of the Odyssey, turning the metaphor into stagecraft, and versions of the story ended up painted on vases you can stand in front of if you time the museum right. You grin at the thought of putting your phone on Do Not Disturb and calling it wax. You tie a loose cord around your own forearm, not as punishment, as permission. I will listen without steering toward the rocks. You make a tiny plan at the threshold, because tiny plans have a way of becoming lives. From Desire's Path, 1. Bold reach today that honors your three whys. Be of use without disappearing. Love with fewer conditions. Learn until you're unafraid of being wrong. From Aversions, 1. Gentle refusal that protects the same trio. You say them out loud to make them heavier in the air. The posts seem to approve. Would-like sentences you can build with. Your stomach interrupts with a practicality you admire. Refueling. It asks in the dialect of someone who has been to too many meetings without snacks. A Spartan memory wanders through with a bowl. Meos Zemos, the infamous black broth. Quirky. A little grim. Ancient writers describe Spartans prizing it and outsiders gagging politely. Whether the recipe was blood-thick and heroic, or mostly legend, is another culinary argument older than your kitchen. Either way, the joke writes itself. You will not be seasoning your life by deprivation courseplay. Temperance is flavor, not famine. You look up. The sky's pride seem open in the mist and a few stars peep through like neighbors checking the hallway. The river's hushes, distant but still legible. The field waits, patient as a well-made hinge. You touch the door on the left, then the right. Feeling the temperature difference, like to truths, you refuse to turn into enemies. Forward, you tell your feet. But they need specifics. All right, you will open desire enough to act. Send the message you're avoiding. Draft the first paragraph. Book the class. Ask the person how they're really doing. Then you'll close it enough to keep your hands from shaking out the last drops of the day like a stingy bartender. You will open a version enough to rest. Say no once, without a novella of excuses. Step back from the argument you're itching to win. Choose silence where it will heal. Then you will close it before it becomes a hiding place labeled self-care in calligraphy. The figure taps the lintel. Doors are seasonal, they say. Peace is not permanent. War is not destiny. Open, closed on purpose. You picture the Janus gate swinging in the forum, while shopkeepers took note and parents recalibrated their errands. You picture your own calendar flexing around the weather of desire and the weather of fear. Historians still argue whether inner peace is a private luxury or a public duty. The field answers with dew on your cuffs, and the memory of Fabius buying time. Delay panic, not action. You step, not left, not right, through. Between the doors is a narrow strip you didn't notice at first. A threshold lane, a craftsman's compromise that isn't a compromise at all. It borrows a few boards from desire, a few stones from aversion, and it fits your stride like it was cut to measure. The lane curves, as if embarrassed to be useful, and soon the doors are behind you, behaving like all good doors do, waiting until you need them again without texting you at midnight. Light joke 1. You imagine desire's door subscribing you. To a newsletter, you unsubscribe. You walk until the ground firms and the mist begins to sparkle with distant city light. In your pocket, the ruler's warm, a handheld quorum. The mirror's questions ping like quiet stars. What would you keep if no one clapped? This lane, you think. This way of choosing that feels like building, not gambling. The river's hands are easy to borrow here. They hold, release, hold, release. You practice letting a want rest on your palm without making it your surname. You practice letting a no sit on your tongue without making it your identity. Behind you, somewhere back at the posts, a heron probably landed on the lintel the moment you left, and the scarecrow nodded as if to say, "That's the way." Ahead, darker ridge rises, stones peeking through like spine, mountains, or at least their practice version. On a ledge, you can just make out something pale with letters. The word arrives before you can read it. Amor Fati, love of fate, not because it's always sweet, but because it's always yours to shape into meaning. You check your kit. Chisel edge true, square honest, plain calm. Rulers responsive. 3. Wise breathing. You smile at the doors behind you, grateful, unsentimental. Choices are tools too. You don't sleep with a hammer under your pillow. Light joke too. You tried once, very bad dreams. Tonight, you'll carry only what belongs in the next room. The lane lifts. The night approves. Your feet keep time with a song you didn't know you knew. One that sounds like wood fitting. Water moving. Gates opening and closing in the right weather. You are deep in the mountains now. The air is thin, sharp, almost crystalline in the lungs, and the wind moves across the ridges like an ancient choir breathing between syllables. You've been climbing since morning, boots scraping against jagged rock, the sound of your own breath louder than anything else. Here, among peaks dusted with snow and clouds so low they seem to rest their bellies on the stone, you begin to feel the weight of time differently. Every step is slower, heavier, as if the mountain itself were asking, are you ready to meet what waits here? The path narrows until it is little more than a vein of granite clinging to the cliff's edge. On your left, the drop plummets into a shadowed gorge, where a river glitters faintly like a silver thread far below. On your right, the rock wall rises sheer, streaked with ice, its surface cold to the touch. The wind funnels through this corridor, pulling your hood back, reminding you how small you are against the bones of the earth. And then you see it, a shape ahead, part of the cliff yet somehow apart from it. A boulder, massive, resting on a natural pedestal. The surface is weathered by centuries of storms, but the front face has been smoothed, as though carved by deliberate hands. Upon that smoothed face, chiseled into the stone, so deeply the letters seem to breathe shadow, are the words, Amor Fati. You stand there, letting the wind whip past you, reading the words again and again. Latin, old as the mountain's patience, older than your own fears. You mouth the translation, love your fate, not endure it, not tolerate it, not fight against it until you are too tired to stand. Love it. The idea is not gentle. It does not comfort you like a warm blanket on a winter night. It is a demand, a challenge, a truth to easily admired from a distance, but infinitely harder to live. You think of the moments in your life when you cursed the turn of events, when you clenched your fists against the unfairness, when you felt that everything had conspired to break you. To love those moments, to see them as gifts, the mind resists, the heart hesitates. A voice comes from behind you, low and steady, as if it has been here all along. You turn, and there is a figure, cloaked, hooded, standing with a staff. His face is lined, eyes steady as the mountain itself. There is no introduction, no greeting, only a question. Do you know, he says, why this stone is here? You shake your head. It is not a shrine to comfort the weary, he continues. It is a reminder for those who still believe they can bargain with life. You cannot. You can only embrace it, the whole of it, as the artist embraces every stroke, even those that seem wrong, because they are part of the final painting. You look at the letters again, noticing how the chisel marks catch the light, how the grooves seem deeper than stone should allow. You ask him who carved it. No one remembers, he says. Some say a wandering philosopher. Others, a hermit who lost everything in a single day. It doesn't matter. What matters is that each who stands here must decide. Will you carry these words down the mountain, or will you leave them here, just another carving you once saw? The question lodges in you like a splinter. You think of fate not as the script of a puppet master, but as the totality of what is, the pain, the joy, the loss, the unexpected kindness. To love it is to stand unarmored before the world, knowing it will sometimes wound you, and still to say, yes, I choose you. The figure steps closer to the stone and places his hand on it. If you can love your fate, he says, you are free, not free from the world, but free in it. No turn of the wheel can crush you, for you have already given your heart to the turning. You reach out, pressing your palm to the cold surface. The stone vibrates faintly under your touch, or perhaps it's only your pulse. The wind seems to hush, the mountains lean in. You imagine every difficult moment you've lived carved here beside the words, every mistake and heartbreak etched into the rock, and instead of recoiling, you feel a strange gratitude. Without them, you would not be you. Without the shadows, the light would mean nothing. You step back, the figure is gone. Only the stone remains, and the echo of the words in your mind. You begin your descent. The path seems the same, but it isn't. Every gust of wind, every loose rock underfoot, every muscle's ache is no longer something to endure. It is something to love, because it is here, because it is yours. The gorge below, the ice above, the rhythm of your breath, all of it is part of the one fate you'll exchange. At a bend in the trail, you glance back. The stone is still there, small now in the distance, but you can feel it as if you carried it in your chest. Amor Fati. The mountains keep their silence, but you know they have spoken. The path winds down from the high ridges, carrying you through layers of changing air. The sharp, frozen bite of the mountain peaks softens into something warmer, sweeter. The snow thins, the wind gentles, and the sky opens wider above you, revealing deep bands of gold and rose that seem to pour from the horizon. The descent is easier on the legs, but heavier on the heart, as though leaving the stone behind were leaving a part of yourself in the thin air. You follow the trail through a narrow cleft in the rock, where sunlight spills like molten honey onto the ground. Beyond the gap, the world changes. Before you stretches a valley, wide and cut gently between low green hills. The light here is different, softer, as if the sun has learned restraint, illuminating everything with a golden warmth that makes even the smallest stones seem precious. The grass ripples like water under the touch of a slow breeze, and the air is thick with the scent of something you name, but feels like home. You take your first step onto the valley floor, and the sound changes. The crunch of your boots on rock is gone. Now there is only the muted thud of earth, the occasional whisper of stems bending, the faint song of distant birds. It's a quiet, not the void of the mountaintop, but the fullness of something, alive and at peace. As you walk deeper, you notice shapes in the grass. They're not flowers, not exactly, but delicate bursts of light, as though the grass itself has grown lanterns. You bend to touch one, and the moment your fingers brush the petals, a memory floods you. A hand on your shoulder when you thought you were alone. A meal left at your door when you had nothing. A laugh shared under a broken roof during a storm. You pull back, startled, and the glow fades, but the feeling remains. You stand still for a moment, letting it settle in you, and then you see more of them scattered across the valley, hundreds, thousands, each one waiting. You begin to move among them, letting your fingers trail lightly over their glowing crowns. With each touch, another moment rises, moments you had forgotten or dismissed as too small to matter. A stranger holding the door when your hands were full, the taste of water after hours of thirst. A night when you thought you would never sleep, and then morning came anyway, your steps slow. The valley does not rush you. There is no need here to reach the far side quickly. This place exists outside of hurry, outside of the hunger for what's next. It invites you to pause, to kneel, to remember. At the heart of the valley, you find a pool. It's not large, no more than a few steps across, but its surface is perfectly still, as if it has never been touched by wind. The water is so clear that it seems not to exist at all, and you can see the small stones beneath it, each one shimmering faintly. You crouch at its edge, and the reflection that looks back at you is not the one from the mirror in the dark corridor. This one shows you surrounded by all those moments. The lanterns in the grass, the hands, the smiles, The nights that ended after all, a figure approaches, though you never saw where they came from. They are dressed in simple linen, their face unremarkable yet radiant with a kind of ease you've rarely seen in others. They sit beside you without a word, their presence calm and steady. This valley, they say at last, is made from what you have kept. You frown, not understanding, not possessions, they explain, but acknowledgements. Every time you noticed a kindness, no matter how small, you planted a seed here. Most people walk through their lives scattering seeds and never returning, but you came back. You look out over the field of glowing lanterns. I didn't think I'd remembered so much. Gratitude, they say, is not the keeping of a list. It is the keeping of a place inside you where nothing is wasted. Even the smallest gesture can bloom if it is not forgotten. The words settle into you like the warmth of the valley's light. You think of how often you've chased what you did not have, blind to what you already carried. How often you've stood on mountaintops, aching for the next horizon, never realizing the gold was under your feet all along. The figure rises, dusting their hands lightly against their tunic. Stay as long as you like, but remember, the world beyond will not always shine like this. The valley is here for you to return to, but you must carry its light with you. They walk away, disappearing among the lanterns until you cannot tell them apart from the glow dot. You sit by the pool for a long time, dipping your fingers into the water and watching the ripples carry small reflections outward. You realize that this place is not magic in the way mountains or stones are. It is built from the ordinary, from the overlooked, from the moments that rarely get told in stories. And yet it is more powerful than anything you have faced so far, because it teaches you that the weight of a life is not measured in grand victories, but in the 1,000 small gifts you once thought too trivial to keep. When you finally stand, you walk through the valley slowly, touching the lanterns not to summon memories now, but simply to say thank you, to the valley, to the moments, to the version of you who chose to notice dot at the far edge. The hills rise again, and the golden light begins to fade into the silver of approaching evening. You do not feel lost at its leaving, because you have learned what the figure meant. You can take it with you. When you look back one last time, the valley glows like a constellation on the earth, each lantern a star in the map of your life. And you know the way back here will never be lost. The hills behind you fade into shadow, their golden crown of light dimming into the indigo hush of evening. Ahead, a road stretches wide under a sky opening into infinity. It is not paved, not marked, not guarded, only a long ribbon of earth, pale under the moonlight, winding into the distance. The stars above are sharp and countless, as if the air here has been polished clean by centuries of wind. You stand at the threshold, feeling the last trace of the valley's warmth at your back. The road calls to you, not with urgency, but with a kind of quiet inevitability. You know you must walk it. Your first steps feel strange. There are no trees here to hide behind, no walls to lean against, no mountains to cradle you in their stone embrace. The openness is almost overwhelming. You are exposed, every movement visible to the horizon. In the beginning, your body still carries its old habits, the way you glance over your shoulder, the way your eyes dart to the shadows at the edge of the road. You are waiting for something to leap out, for danger to claim its familiar place at your side. But nothing comes. The night air is cool, and the only sound is your own footsteps on the earth. In that stillness, you hear your fear breathing, shallow, restless, looking for something to feed on. You realize it is not the world that keeps fear alive. It is you. It needs your attention, your agreement, your belief that it is necessary. Without that, it begins to starve. Somewhere far ahead, a figure appears on the road. They are walking toward you, their steps unhurried. As the distance between you shrinks, you see they are clothed in a simple traveler's cloak, the hood pulled low. When they draw near, they lift it back, revealing a face both weathered and ageless. They stop in front of you and study you for a moment, their gaze neither kind nor cruel, only searching. You've carried fear a long way, they say, their voice low and steady. Why? The question is simple, but your answer is tangled. Because it protected me, because it warned me, because without it, I might have been reckless, because I didn't know how to put it down. The figure nods as if they've heard this many times before. Fear is not the enemy, but it should never be the captain. Tonight, you choose. Will you walk with it beside you, or will you let it follow far behind? They step aside, gesturing for you to pass. You move forward, and for the first time you notice that the road itself is different depending on where you place your attention. When your mind drifts to fear, the path narrows, the shadows lengthen, and every sound is sharper. When you let the breath slow and your gaze lift to the stars, the road widens again, the air eases, and you walk as if the earth is carrying you. The figure follows at a distance, silent now, like a shadow that refuses to press close. You realize this is what they meant. Fear can walk behind you without steering your steps. It does not vanish, but it loses the weight of command. Hours pass. The moon tilts west, and the stars wheel slowly overhead. You begin to notice the beauty that was invisible when you were listening for threats. The faint silver shimmer of dew frumming on the grasses, the soft hush of wind moving across the plains, the way your own footsteps make a rhythm like a slow heartbeat. Somewhere along the way, you stop checking over your shoulder. You stop imagining what might be waiting beyond the reach of your sight. You are simply here, moving forward, under a sky so vast it makes your old fears look small. When the first hint of dawn brushes the horizon, the figure's voice reaches you one last time. Though they are far behind now, fear will always be there. But so will the road. You turn your eyes ahead, to where the sky is softening into pale blue and the world is waking. The road glows faintly in the newborn light, not as a path of escape, but as an invitation to live as if fear is no longer the one holding the map. You keep walking, and the space between each breath feels wider than it ever has. The road without fear carries you into the early morning. The pale blue of dawn deepens into gold, and the earth under your feet shifts from the cool softness of night to the slow warmth of day. You have walked a long way now, through mountains and valleys, across bridges and past towers, along rivers and open plains. Yet this part of the road feels different, lighter, almost as if the ground itself is breathing with you. In the distance, you see something rising from the horizon. At first it looks like a tree, its shape slender and reaching upward. As you draw closer, you realize it is not wood, but bronze, a tall, narrow frame holding a single bell. It stands alone, rooted in no temple, surrounded by no walls, its metal glowing faintly in the sunlight. There is no rope hanging from it, no mallet nearby. It seems to wait, unstruck. When you arrive, you stop a few paces away, the air around. The bell feels still, heavier somehow, as though it remembers every sound it has ever made. You glance around, expecting to see someone, a keeper, a guide, the hooded traveler from the road, but you are alone. You step closer. The bell is taller than you, its surface marked with patterns that look almost like ripples frozen in metal. You run your fingers across them, and they are cool, smooth, but alive with something you can't name. It is then you notice that the patterns are not random. They are the shapes of moments from your journey. The narrow bridge over the misted abyss, the garden where questions bloomed instead of flowers, the stone carved with Amor Fati, the golden valley, the open road. Every step, every place, every teacher you met is here, spiraling upward in the metal skin of the bell. This is no ordinary instrument. This is the vessel of your path. You take a slow breath, wondering if you are meant to strike it somehow, but as the thought forms, a sound begins to rise, not from the bell itself, but from somewhere inside you. A deep, resonant tone, faint at first, then stronger, as if the bell is not meant to be rung from the outside at all. The vibrations start in your chest, low and steady, and move outward until you can feel them in your fingertips, your teeth, the soreness of your feet. it is then you understand. The bell is not separate from you. It was never meant to hang in some distant place waiting to be called. It has been in you since the beginning, quiet, waiting for you to remember its note. The tone is not perfect. It wavers, trembles, catches now, and then like a voice unused to speaking. But as you stand there, breathing with it, the sound grows more even, more pure. And in that sound are the principles you have gathered, the truths you have chosen, courage, balance, gratitude, acceptance, freedom. They ring together, not as separate notes, but as one chord. You close your eyes, letting it fill you. Around you, the world seems to respond, the grass bending slightly as if listening, the light shifting, the air holding its breath. You realize, this is the sound you'll carry forward into every place you walk. This is what will guide you when there is no map, no teacher, no familiar ground. It will not tell you where to go, but it will tell you how to walk. When you open your eyes, the bell still stands before you, but it no longer feels distant or monumental. It feels like a mirror, not showing your face, but the shape of who you are. When you live by the note in your chest, you turn to leave. There is no sense of ending here, only a sense of continuation. The road stretches onward, but it is not as important as it once was. You could walk it, or you could sit here under the open sky. Either way, the bell would still sound when you choose to listen. As you step away, the tone fades, not into silence, but into the steady rhythm of your heart. The world resumes its small movements. A breeze slides across the plain. A bird calls somewhere high. The sun edges higher in the sky. Life, ordinary and vast, continues. You walk on, lighter now, the echo of the bell resonating with each breath. And though you know there will be storms ahead, and valleys darker than the one you crossed, you also know this: the bell is always with you. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be broken. And it will ring as long as you live in such a way that your steps keep time with its note. By the time the horizon swallows the bell from view, you no longer need to look back. It is already ringing in your heart.